I'm Carol Morrison, and for most of my life, I thought the hardest thing I'd ever have to do was raise my own kids. At 61, sitting in my quiet little house in Newport, Oregon, I figured the worst was behind me. I had scraped by through sleepless nights, sick days, hurt feelings, and endless bills. I never imagined the hardest fight of all would come years later, and it wouldn't even be for myself. It would be for my granddaughter. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon. Melissa's name flashed on my phone screen, and I already knew it wouldn't be a friendly chat. Her tone was brisk, efficient, with no time for small talk. She asked if I could come stay at their house for 2 weeks to look after Emma while she and Ryan went away. No explanation beyond the usual vague reasoning, just "we need you, and it's only 2 weeks." That was all. No, "how are you?" No thanks. No acknowledgement that I might have my own life. I said yes, of course. I said yes, even though my chest tightened as I hung up. It always stung a little, knowing I only seemed to matter when there was no one else to call. But that's what mothers and grandmothers do, right? We show up. I packed my bag in silence that night, folding sweaters into neat piles, feeling the same quiet ache I'd felt a dozen times before. The next morning, I got in my car and drove up the coast to their house, past the beaches, and into a neighborhood of big white homes that seemed to glare down at me. As their house came into view, tall and perfect at the end of the street, I felt a chill that wasn't from the February air. The place looked beautiful, sure, but there was nothing warm about it. The closer I got, the more it felt like stepping into something I couldn't quite name, something cold and waiting. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Whatever I thought I was walking into, part of me already knew it was going to be worse. The driveway was lined with perfect hedges and a fountain that seemed more for show than anything else. The house stood tall and gleaming at the end, all white stone and glass, every edge too sharp, every window too clean. I pulled in and shut off the engine, sitting there for a moment, just looking at it, already feeling smaller than I'd felt in years. Melissa opened the front door before I'd even rung the bell, waving me in with a hurried smile that didn't reach her eyes. Her coat was still on, and her hair perfectly in place, but her hands never stopped moving, already checking her watch as she thanked me for coming. Ryan appeared a moment later, barely glancing up from his phone, muttering a stiff hello, before disappearing again. I stepped into the foyer and felt the cold marble under my shoes. The house was beautiful, sure, but it didn't feel like a home. It felt staged, like a hotel lobby, with all the warmth stripped out. Melissa led me toward the living room, rattling off medication times and instructions like she was reading a grocery list, and then she gestured vaguely toward the corner. That's when I saw her. Emma sat in a wheelchair by the bay window, dressed in a pale sweater and soft pants. Her small hands folded neatly in her lap. Her legs didn't move. Her eyes didn't blink. She stared straight ahead at nothing at all, like she wasn't even there. Melissa touched her shoulder without looking down and told me not to worry. She wouldn't be any trouble. She barely noticed anything these days. But as she turned back toward the stairs, I thought I saw it. Just for a second, Emma's eyes shifted. Not much, just the faintest flicker, but it was there. A quick, sharp glance in my direction before she settled back into her blank stare. And it was enough to make my stomach turn, because in that tiny moment, I could see her. She was in there, and she was watching. The kitchen was quiet, except for the faint hum of the radio and the soft boil of pasta water. I stirred the sauce slowly, letting the scent of garlic and tomatoes calm my nerves, telling myself this was just another night, just another dinner. My back ached from leaning over the counter, but I kept moving, trying to feel normal in a house that never quite let me breathe. That's when I felt it. A shift in the air behind me. The kind of shift you can't explain, like someone's watching. My hand froze over the pot, and I turned slowly, half expecting to see one of the staff back early, but what I saw made the spoon slip right through my fingers and clatter to the floor. Emma was standing in the doorway. Her knees shook, and her hand clung to the frame like she might fall any second. But she was on her feet. Her head was up. Her eyes were locked on mine, and for a long, silent second, I just stood there, too stunned to move. My mouth went dry. I barely managed to whisper her name, but she didn't answer. She took one slow, trembling step into the kitchen, her breath coming in shallow little bursts. Her nightgown hung loose around her thin frame, her hair falling into her face, but her eyes stayed steady. There was nothing blank about them now. She leaned against the counter, still gasping, and finally her lips parted. Her voice was thin, scratchy from disuse, but it was there. She told me they were after her trust fund, that they made her stay quiet, that she couldn't keep pretending anymore. Her chest rose and fell as she gripped the edge of the counter, her fingers white at the knuckles. She looked at me like she was pleading, like I was the only one left in the world who might believe her. Then she whispered what broke me clean in two. "Please help." The words came out so soft, I almost didn't hear them, but they were there, hanging in the air between us, fragile and desperate and real. And all I could do was nod, because my voice was gone, and my heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might shatter. She sank onto the bar stool and buried her face in her hands for a moment before looking up at me. Her eyes were wet but steady, and her voice cracked as she said she had never really been sick. She said she had always been able to walk and talk, even when she was little, but they told her not to. They told her if she ever made a sound or took a step in front of anyone, they would send her away somewhere dark, somewhere full of screaming. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her knuckles scraping against the counter, like she needed to hold on to keep from falling apart. She said she didn't even know what she had done wrong the first time. Just waved at a neighbor through the window when she was 5. That night, they locked her in the basement, no lights, no blankets, just her and the cold. After that, she stayed quiet. I felt something hot rise in my chest as she spoke, a mix of grief and rage, so sharp it made my hands shake. She told me about the trust her grandfather left her. $2 million in her name, but only if she was deemed competent. They said if she stayed quiet, they'd use the money just for a little while, just until they got back on their feet. But then she overheard them one night, saying she'd never turn 18. Not if they could help it. Her voice grew softer as she slipped off the stool and motioned me to follow her. In her room, she pulled a faded book from behind a picture frame and set it in my hands. Page after page of tiny, perfect handwriting. Things she'd overheard, dates, names, even bank numbers she'd memorized. Then she reached under her mattress and pulled out folded papers, some notarized, some with letterheads I recognized from banks and lawyers. She looked at me, then her chin trembling, but her eyes defiant. She said she wasn't stupid. She knew they thought she was just a burden, just a check to cash. But she wanted me to see she was more than that, just a child who wanted to matter. I ran my hand over the papers, my heart breaking in two as I whispered that she did. She always did. I waited until the house was quiet that night before I dared to make the call. The staff had left hours ago, and Emma was asleep in her room, her journal tucked under her pillow. I stood in the dark kitchen with the cordless phone pressed to my ear, my other hand cupping it like that could muffle my voice from whatever might be listening. Ria answered on the second ring, her voice just as sharp and steady as I remembered from all those years ago in debate club. I kept my voice low as I told her everything, watching the corners of the ceiling for the tiny cameras Emma had shown me. My words came out fast and clumsy, but she didn't interrupt. I told her about the pills, the threats, the trust fund, the way they kept her quiet by making her afraid. My hand shook as I spoke, my eyes darting to the hallway every few seconds, as though someone would walk in and rip the phone from me. When I finally stopped talking, she was quiet for a long moment, then she told me exactly what to do. She said, "Don't confront them yet, not until we have proof. Keep everything as normal as you can. Take photos. Record her walking if you can. Make copies of those papers and keep one outside the house." She spoke with the kind of calm that made me feel like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't crazy after all. When I hung up, I let the phone sit in my lap for a long time, my heart still hammering. My eyes lingered on the ceiling one more time, and then on the hallway where Emma's door was cracked just a little, like she had been waiting to see what I would do. I took a deep breath and slipped the phone back into its cradle, already planning my next move. I didn't know what this fight was going to cost me, but for the first time since I stepped into this house, I felt sure of one thing. I wasn't going to let them win. The next morning, I stood over the sink holding the crushed pills in my hand. They felt like tiny grains of sand sticking to my skin as I turned on the faucet and let them fall, watching them swirl down the drain. My chest was tight, my stomach twisting, but my mind was already made up. Whatever those pills were doing to her, I couldn't be part of it anymore. That evening, I pretended to mix her dose into the milky shake, just as always, but I set it down untouched on the counter. Emma watched me from her chair, her eyes cautious but shining with something I hadn't seen before. When I finally met her gaze and gave the slightest nod, her shoulders relaxed, and she almost smiled. By the end of the first day, her voice sounded stronger, her words clearer. She sat up straighter during breakfast and even reached for her spoon on her own. That night, as I folded blankets on the couch, I heard a soft laugh coming from her room. My heart clenched at the sound of it, so unexpected and warm that I almost dropped the blanket. On the second day, she walked clear across the living room. Her steps were shaky, and her hand trailed the wall for balance, but she moved like she belonged in her own body again. I stood at the doorway and watched her turn in a slow circle, her nightgown catching the light, her hair falling loose around her shoulders. Her cheeks were flushed, and for the first time, she looked like a little girl and not a ghost. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, torn between terror and joy. I couldn't stop picturing what would happen if they came home early and caught her like this, but I couldn't stop smiling either. The house felt different somehow, like the weight pressing down on it was starting to lift. I rolled over and whispered into the dark that no matter what happened next, I'd do whatever it took to keep that laugh alive. The sound of the front door slamming cracked through the quiet morning like a gunshot. I froze halfway to the kitchen, my heart already racing as heavy footsteps followed in the foyer. Emma's eyes went wide where she stood at the top of the stairs, her small hands gripping the banister so tight, her knuckles whitened. I darted up to her and whispered for her to sit back down. My fingers fumbled with the wheelchair at the landing, tugging it into place and draping the blanket back over her legs. She obeyed without a word, her face calm, but her chest rising and falling too fast. Melissa's voice came first, sharp and suspicious, calling my name as she and Ryan swept through the hallway. They appeared at the bottom of the stairs, still in their travel clothes, their eyes already scanning the room like they expected something to be wrong. I kept my own face neutral as I descended slowly, praying my hands didn't shake too much when they stopped me midway. Melissa's eyes narrowed. She asked if I'd kept to the schedule because the medication log in the cabinet looked off. I lied smooth as I could, saying she gagged on one dose, and I waited for the next. Ryan crossed his arms, saying I was given clear instructions and asking why I thought I knew better. My jaw clenched, but I said nothing more, just kept my tone even as I met his glare. Then it happened. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement at the top of the stairs. Emma had pushed the blanket off and was gripping the rail again, her little feet bare on the wood. One slow step, then another, her chin high, her knees steady, despite the tremor in her hands. The room fell silent as every head turned to watch her come down. The sound of her footsteps was louder than anything else, echoing through that cold house like a warning. She reached the bottom, stopped just in front of Melissa, and lifted her face. Her voice was quiet but steady when she said she was done pretending. She said she wanted her life back. For a long second, no one moved. Then I stepped closer, standing just behind her, and for the first time, I felt the fear shift from her shoulders to theirs. The doorbell rang just as Melissa's voice rose into a sharp hiss, her fingers digging into Emma's arm. Everyone froze, the sound cutting through the room like a blade. I moved first, stepping past them all toward the door, my hands surprisingly steady as I turned the knob and pulled it open. There they stood. Rhea in her trench coat, a file tucked under her arm, her eyes cool and unflinching. Beside her stood 2 uniformed police officers and a woman in a navy blazer with a CPS badge clipped to her lapel. Rhea's voice was calm but loud enough to fill the foyer as she announced they were here to speak with the minor child regarding reports of medical abuse and financial exploitation. Melissa sputtered first, her face going pale before flushing red. She demanded to know who called them and insisted they leave at once. Ryan stepped forward, trying to smooth his voice into something reasonable, saying it was all a misunderstanding, just family business. I stayed silent and stepped aside to let them in. The CPS worker knelt in front of Emma, her tone soft and even as she introduced herself. For the first time all morning, I saw the tension leave Emma's shoulders just a little as she nodded and let herself be led to the sunroom where the light streamed in. I stayed by the doorway, close enough to watch, but far enough not to interfere. Melissa's protests turned shrill, her words tumbling over themselves as she accused Emma of lying, of exaggerating. Ryan tried to calm her, but his own voice was cracking. Then came the last desperate move. Melissa reached into her purse and pulled out her checkbook, waving it toward the officers, saying they could settle this quietly. The lead officer didn't even look at it as he reached for his cuffs. When Rhea opened the file and began reading from Emma's journal entries, the notarized documents, the prescriptions in Melissa's name, Melissa finally broke. She started to cry, pointing at Ryan, then at herself, babbling excuses about saving the family and not meaning for it to go so far. Emma sat straight-backed in the sunroom, her small hands folded in her lap, her voice quiet but clear as she told them everything. I stood there and watched, my chest tight but proud, knowing she finally had the chance to speak. And this time, everyone was listening. The court granted me emergency guardianship 2 days later, and just like that, Emma came home with me. My little house in Newport suddenly felt alive again, her laughter bouncing off the walls as she explored every corner. There were still bad nights where she clutched her pillow tight, but each morning, she woke up braver than the one before. By the second week, she started school at the little elementary down the street. The teachers were kind, and a girl named Hannah made her a friendship bracelet on the very first day. When I watched them holding hands in the pickup line, Emma's face lit with a shy smile I hadn't seen in years, and I had to turn away for a second just to catch my breath. One afternoon, she came running in from the bus, her knees smudged with dirt, her backpack swinging wildly. She called for me from the kitchen and held out a crumpled piece of paper she'd been keeping safe all day. On it were 2 stick figures walking hand in hand beneath a crooked little sun. In big, blocky letters, she'd written across the top, "I was never silent. I was waiting." I knelt down and pulled her into my arms, the smell of crayons and fresh air still clinging to her sweater. For the first time in a long while, I felt like we were both exactly where we belonged. In the months that followed, I worked with Rhea to set up a small fund for children like Emma. It wasn't much, just enough to cover a few nights in a safe place, or pay for someone to stand up in court when no one else would. We called it the bridge, because sometimes all a child needs is one step out of the dark to find their voice again. Melissa came by one afternoon with flowers in her hands and tears already on her cheeks. We didn't say much, but we sat at my kitchen table for a long time, and for the first time, I felt her finally see her own daughter as more than an obligation. We're still figuring out how to move forward, but at least now she shows up. I think about Emma's drawing often and how many children are still out there pretending because no one is watching closely enough to see them. Silence is easy to misread. It's easy to look away when it makes you uncomfortable. But sometimes, what someone needs most is just for you to care enough to look closer. And once you do, you can't unsee what's right in front of you.